The entire university heard the scream before anyone understood what had happened, a sharp and stunned sound that didn't belong inside a quiet math department at sunrise. It came from a place of disbelief, like a person watching their whole sense of superiority fall apart in one terrible second. And if anyone had walked into that dusty hallway just a moment earlier, they would have seen a sight that made no sense at all. A world-famous professor standing frozen like a statue, staring at an old chalkboard where the janitor, the man everyone ignored, had just solved the equation that mathematicians called impossible. The story of how things reached that moment didn't start in brilliance or glory. It started in pride. It started with a man who believed he was untouchable. The professor, Dr. Leonard Hale, had built his career on being the smartest person in every room. He carried himself with a confidence that felt more like a warning: keep your distance unless you wanted to feel small. Students respected him, but only in the way people respect fire: beautiful to watch from far away, dangerous to touch. He loved two things more than anything: attention and the sound of his own achievements. Every lecture was a stage. Every student was an audience. Every mistake someone made was an opportunity for him to remind them how high above them he stood. The equation, the one that would later change his life, was his obsession. For 10 years, he worked on it, lived around it, breathed in its unsolved weight. It was written across notebooks, napkins, old boards, and even on the walls of his home office. It was supposed to earn him another award, another headline, another round of applause. It was supposed to prove that he was still the genius everyone said he was. But slowly, quietly, and painfully, it started to prove something else: he was stuck. No matter how many early mornings he spent tapping chalk against the board or how many late nights he spent muttering theories to himself, he couldn't solve it. And the longer it stayed unsolved, the angrier he became. The frustration grew inside him like a storm. Soon even the smallest inconvenience made him explode. A student asking a question. A colleague suggesting a different path. A door not closing exactly right. And worst of all, the thing he hated most: people who didn't have the education he had daring to exist around his brilliance. That was where the janitor came in. His name was Samuel. If you asked around campus, people would describe him with soft kindness: gentle, quiet, humble, always carrying his old mop bucket, always working early and leaving late. Students liked him because he treated everyone the same, whether they were a scholarship freshman or a top-scoring senior. Staff liked him because he never complained, even when cleaning spills at midnight or shoveling snow at dawn. No one really knew much about his life, but everyone knew one thing: Samuel was invisible to the people who wanted to feel important. To Dr. Hale, he was barely a human being at all. Every morning, Samuel cleaned the hall outside the professor's office, whistling softly under his breath. And every morning, Hale stepped around him like stepping around an obstacle. Sometimes the professor made comments, the kind that sounded like jokes but carried sharp edges. Comments about wasted potential, about uneducated people trying to live in academic spaces, about how some minds were meant for greatness and some were meant to push brooms. Samuel heard it all but never reacted. He wiped the floors, emptying trash bins, and moved on with a calmness that looked like acceptance but was really something deeper, something the professor would one day regret underestimating. Then came the day that started like all others but ended like a story no one would ever forget. It was early morning. The sun wasn't fully awake yet, and the hallways were quiet. Dr. Hale was pacing inside his office, chalk dust on his sleeves, frustration in his eyes, staring at the giant board that held the equation he couldn't solve. He traced the symbols with his finger, trying to force his tired mind to see something new, something brilliant, something that could save his reputation. Then, in one bitter moment of disappointment, he stepped back and made a decision fueled more by ego than logic. He dragged the chalkboard out into the hallway, right in front of Samuel, who was mopping the floors. He told himself he was just taking a break. But a darker part of him wanted an audience. He wanted to perform. He wanted to show how far above others he was, especially the people he believed were beneath him. Samuel stepped aside politely, moving his cleaning cart out of the professor's way. The man always showed respect, even when he didn't receive any in return. Dr. Hale tapped the chalkboard dramatically, as if lecturing an invisible class, explaining how only a truly gifted mind could solve a monstrosity like this. He explained how people needed years of education, decades of study, miles of intelligence. He made a show of it, throwing big words around like confetti. And then, with a smirk that carried the weight of arrogance, he said the sentence he would later wish he had swallowed. "If you're so confident, solve this equation and I'll marry you." He expected laughter from the empty hallway. He expected Samuel to smile awkwardly and walk away. He expected his ego to grow larger from the moment. But what he didn't expect was the silence that followed. Samuel walked closer to the board, not mocking, not scared, just curious. He looked at it the way a person looks at an old memory they haven't touched in years. His eyes softened in recognition, like he had seen something familiar. He didn't reach for the chalk. Not yet. He just studied the symbols like they were puzzle pieces he had once held in his hands. Dr. Hale felt annoyance rise. He told himself Samuel was pretending, trying to look smart, trying to impress someone who wouldn't even remember his name tomorrow. He almost told him to step back, to stop wasting time. But something made him stay quiet. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the certainty that the janitor would make a fool of himself. Maybe it was the desire to watch someone fail. Samuel finally picked up the chalk. The professor almost choked on his own breath. What was happening? Why was this man touching the board? Why was this man even thinking he had the right? But Samuel didn't hesitate. His hand moved with confidence, not guessing, not stumbling. It was steady, sure, almost practiced. He began filling in the missing steps the professor had spent a decade chasing. Each line connected smoothly to the next. Each number linked perfectly. Each symbol slid into place like it had been waiting all this time for his touch. The professor took a small step back, confusion tightening around him like a rope. He squinted, expecting mistakes, expecting nonsense, expecting a chaotic mess he could mock later. But there were no mistakes. Samuel was solving it, not trying, not hoping, solving, and not slowly, not nervously, not like someone learning, like someone remembering. A cold wave hit Drive Hale so hard he stopped breathing. His heartbeat hammered against his ribs, trying to catch up with the shock bursting through him. He leaned in, desperately searching for an error, an impossible jump, a flaw, anything. But the lines were correct. The method was clean. The logic was flawless. It was the kind of solution mathematicians dream about, the kind that wins awards. Then Samuel placed the last stroke of chalk on the board and stepped back, his eyes quiet, his face tired, almost sad. Dr. Hale froze. The equation was solved. By the janitor. The same janitor he mocked, ignored, walked past, talked down to, and treated like he had no value. The same man he believed had no education, no future, no potential. The hallway felt like it had stopped living. In the silence, Drive Hale's face drained of color. For the first time in years, he felt truly small. Not because someone had outsmarted him, but because someone had outsmarted him without trying. His mind raced as he stared at the solution. He knew brilliance when he saw it. He knew genius when he faced it. And he knew, deep inside, that he had just been defeated by a man he didn't even see as worthy of conversation. Students began arriving for morning classes, and soon whispers filled the hall. Word spread quickly. The janitor solved the impossible equation. Phones came out, eyes turned, gasps echoed. Some laughed in disbelief. Some stared in awe. For once, people weren't looking at the professor. They were looking at Samuel. But Samuel didn't stay long. He didn't pose for pictures, didn't explain how he did it, didn't wait for applause. He quietly put the chalk back, picked up his mop, and walked away with the same quiet footsteps he arrived with. He left behind a hallway full of stunned witnesses and a professor who suddenly looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Later, the truth would come out. Samuel had once been a brilliant mathematician in another country. A civil war had destroyed his home, taken away his family, and forced him to flee. He lost everything: his documents, his awards, his career. He took the first job he could find to survive. He cleaned floors because life left him no other option. But knowledge never leaves a person who carries it with love. The professor would remember that morning for the rest of his life. Not because he felt embarrassed, but because it forced him to finally see what he had spent years ignoring. Greatness doesn't come from titles. Intelligence doesn't come from degrees. Worth doesn't come from status. And sometimes the people we overlook the most are carrying worlds of brilliance inside them. The equation would later be published with Samuel's name on it. Students would greet him with respect. Staff would treat him like a colleague. And the math department would quietly update its history, making room for a man who wasn't supposed to exist in the world of geniuses but did anyway. As for the professor, he never mentioned the marriage comment again. But he carried its lesson forever. The lesson that pride blinds, respect reveals, and karma never forgets. And that is how a janitor solved an impossible equation and changed the life of a man who thought he knew everything.